the Millennial Learner. Teachers are responsible for managing and monitoring student learning. Today's students, digital natives, are accustomed to cell phones, computers, and the internet, which make them much different than other generations, and they will need different skills for tomorrow's world. Consider the general characteristics of the millennial generation. What skills, strengths, and gaps, as well as preconceptions, do these students bring to your class? Devise a set of diverse instructional strategies to teach these students.
Hi, I'm Selena Manville, and I'm the K-5 Learning Specialist at the Franciscan School in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we're here today to talk about characteristics of students. We call them the millennial learners. So how are the millennial learners so different from generations in the past? I know for myself, I would have been in kindergarten through 12th grade from about 1975 to about 1988. That would make me a member of Generation X. So Generation X were those born between 1965 and 1981. So education was a lot different when I was there, and it had pretty much been that way for many generations before that. We sat in desks in straight rows, and we pretty much interacted with textbooks, worksheets, paper pencil tasks. We mainly worked alone. We worked independently. I can only remember really a handful of times working with a group, especially in the elementary grades. And there was really only one right way to do something, and your job was to follow those procedures and do exactly what the teacher told you. Well, that is a far cry different from what our 21st century learners are doing in the classroom today. So what are these millennial characteristics that have led to these truly qualitative differences in our students? Millennials are those born after 1982. For the purpose of today's discussion, we're going to discuss them as a broad category, but we need to understand that if we're teaching elementary, middle school students today, we're actually teaching Generation Z. Generation Z kind of have been known as the millennials on steroids, but there are some key distinctions between the two groups. So researchers have compiled these characteristics, and Monaco and Martin reported on how in Strauss's 7 traits of millennial learners. So what are these 7 traits? The first trait is that these children are special. They have been told they were special since they were very young, and a lot of times the criticism is that they're special and rewarded simply for participating and not for achieving. They have always felt this specialness, and at times, again, the criticism is that has led to a sense of entitlement. The second trait is that these students are sheltered. The emphasis here from their Generation X parents is to keep them safe at all times. It is not like the times I remember growing up where we would play outside all day, sometimes our parents not even knowing where we were, and the rule was come inside when the street lights come on. This is much, much different. These children are supervised 24/7. The third trait is that they are team-oriented. They far more prefer to work in a team or in a pack. They prefer to take any little risks that they must take within that pack so that they can succeed as a team, or if they must fail, that they're failing as part of a team and not standing on their own 2 feet. This generation is also confident. While they may not be confident about standing on their own 2 feet, they are confident about their futures. They believe they will do great things in this world and that they will succeed. These students are pressured, which is the next trait. They feel that stressed out feeling most of the time as they go from activity to activity to activity with very little downtime. Essentially, they never have time to unplug. They're also used to that immediate feedback, but that immediate feedback brings with it more pressure. These students, the 6th trait is that they are achieving. They want the A, they want the B. Now, while they may sometimes be a little unrealistic about the work ethic that it takes to achieve that, they very much desire that as a priority for themselves. And lastly, these students are conventional. They actually, more than any other generation, are tolerant of diversity. They, more than the generation before, value and care about what their parents think. And they want to be peacekeepers and truly make this world a better place. So what are the strengths, gaps, and preconceptions of the millennial learner in the classroom? The first thing to remember is that these students are multitaskers. They are used to an influx of sound bites and images and information coming at them 24/7. An interesting story about that is my son came to share with me one of these viral videos that had been on YouTube. And he's 21, so he's part of that millennial generation, and he was so excited to show me this because he really felt like this just showed the disparity between the generations. And in this viral video, this kind of young teen brings a meme to his father, and he presents the meme to his father, and so the father gets the meme, and a meme usually has an image and some text, and the father very carefully first, he goes through it methodically. His eyes go to the text, and he reads the lines very slowly, and he looks up at his son and asks a question or two and continues, and you can start to see the son sort of becoming exasperated at this behavior. Finally, the father looks at the image and he asks the son, who is this in the image? And the son explodes and he says, you don't read it like that, you read it all at once, all at once. And we just laughed and laughed about that because I could see myself in that behavior very analytically, extrapolating the meme and trying to figure it out and essentially missing the whole humorous point, or perhaps proving it, that this really is a difference in how we take in information. While millennial learners can take in all this information, they do want it sort of segmented and chunked into categories in order for them to be able to categorize it or organize it. These students are very tech savvy. And one of the things we've seen is that they can actually help the teachers who may not be at that same level troubleshoot and figure out problems with technology in the classroom. They are not risk takers. They're very afraid of making mistakes. And they've been used to being, maybe because of that sheltered trait, they've been used to being sort of handheld through the process, making it difficult for them at times to make decisions. Millennials want personalized learning. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make a lesson plan for each specific child, but it does mean you need to consider the framework. It's important that learning is meaningful and relevant to them, that they can see the connection, and if they can't, and you can't help them see it, they are in all likelihood not going to be able to learn. And these students are highly social. There was one study done by Gerhardt that was pretty interesting. Gerhardt interviewed some college professors and some college students, and she wanted to ascertain what did they believe were the characteristics that made a professor credible and competent at what they do. And so she interviewed them separately, and on a lot of characteristics it lined up. The professor needed to be educated, the professor needed to have a lot of experience, but there was one characteristic that was very different. The students unilaterally called sociability a key characteristic of a competent and credible instructor. They needed that back and forth reciprocity. They wanted their ideas valued and sort of needed that exchange of ideas. The professors were sort of shocked by this. That is not the educational experience they had. They were used to a lecture format where they received the knowledge, and the professor is the transmitter of knowledge. These students did not see that, so Gerhardt pointed out we had a real clash of values here, and it's something that we need to remember as we're working with our millennial students. So what does research recommend as best practices for working with the millennial learners? The first is one that may be obvious but just as true now, and that is clear expectations and guidelines, that they know exactly what is expected of them and how they are going to be assessed. The second is that millennial learners need relevant, personalized learning experiences. They have to make that personal connection, and we need to search for materials and topics where we can teach standards while still making it relevant for them. The third is that collaborative and cooperative learning are a must. These students not only are highly social, as research has proven, but that is the context in all likelihood that they're going to be working in jobs of the future. The students want timely feedback. They need, maybe because they're so used to instant gratification, in order for them to keep progressing forward, they need us to kind of be that sounding board and to provide that feedback on how they were doing as they go through the problem. Because they are used to being handheld, this actually is a very important thing that we have to start integrating into our lessons, teaching students how to take initiative, how to become more independent, and how to risk that element of failure with a healthy sort of growth mindset, realizing that that is where real learning occurs. And lastly, we have to integrate choice. Choice is a powerful motivator. When students have that ability to choose either what they're going to read or what piece of technology they're going to use to demonstrate their learning, then they become far more engaged in the process and begin to take ownership of their learning. Today, I'm glad to have Kayla Dellinger, our school's technology teacher and leader extraordinaire, with us so we can benefit from her experiences of teaching our students. Welcome, Kayla. So I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, which millennial characteristic do you think is most prominent in millennial learners today?
I think in my experience, the one that's most prominent is the team-oriented and social one. They love working together. They love being with other people.
And I've noticed a lot of the projects that you've structured for classroom teachers in our building are precisely that, no?
They are, yeah, because it doesn't work otherwise. I mean, it really doesn't. And so a lot of the projects that I do are team projects. Not only because the students like it, but because our resources work better in teams.
That really adds then to that collaborative element, which is what they're going to have in the future. So what are the greatest challenges you've kind of experienced working with these students?
Over-socialization.
Their strength is also
really love to socialize. And just attention span is another thing. Like, you can't keep them in one place doing one thing for a really long time. You have to give them smaller tasks to get done and to be moving.
That makes a lot of sense.
Not just being in one place.
That makes a lot of sense as we've been talking about that influx of information. Something I recently came across said that millennials had a 12-second attention span, but Gen Z, they said 8. And I thought probably in terms of how fast they switch things, that maybe that kind of contributes to that. So what are some of the best strategies, or maybe it's activities or even resources that you found to be particularly effective for them?
So one thing I do is I make sure that my students, when we have projects, they always have a choice as to how they're going to present that to us. So some of them are better with videos, some are better typing things out, some are really graphic, so they like to do pictures and graphic designs, comic books, those kinds of things. Some like stop motion, some just like to build with Legos, which is really cool that we've been able to let them do that. And so I think that gives them more ownership, but also more creativity. So definitely giving them a choice and letting them work together really does help, because everybody has a different strength. And some people are really good at getting that information off of the internet or from a book even. And some are really good at displaying it. So giving them something that they feel comfortable with has really helped out.
Well, and we appreciate so much of what you do, because you do have a well-equipped media center here, and I've seen how much the students have enjoyed. So if they have to write something, you pull up that green screen and you can make those fun backgrounds. And I know you have the STEM club after school, which I imagine you do all kinds of cool projects. So.
Yeah, and everything hands-on is the best for these kids. I've noticed that if they are just sitting there listening, they're not getting it nearly as well as when they create something and really do it. project on civil rights. And so they each researched a different aspect. So some of them did the Greensboro sit-ins, and some of them did the Birmingham bombings and things like that. And so then they did this research in the classroom, and then they came in and they used the green screen and they did newscasts.
Oh,
so they got to take what they learned and like convey that to other people. And then along with all of that, they learned how to do video editing and photo editing. And so it was really cool to kind of have that collaboration, have everything come together.
That is awesome. You gave them an opportunity to do authentic creating, personalized, and then took an event in history, and now they really get it. So that is so cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing today about your expertise. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
So in reflecting on my current teaching practices, I wanted to identify some things that would be my teaching goals to improve on what I'm already doing and make it more relevant and useful for our millennial learners today. And the first teaching goal I have is to intentionally scaffold independence. So as a learning specialist, I already tend to break things down into its smallest parts, to kind of chunk it to make information easier to learn. I create different strategy sheets and tools that students use. But what I realize I don't always do is plan how to wean them off of those tools. I might leave them stuck thinking about how this generation has been handheld and needs these independent skills. It's really getting me to reflect on how to more intentionally use it, only to the extent it's needed, and then to pull back and encourage students to take that risk. That failure is actually an amazing launch point for true learning and for deeper problem solving. The second teaching goal I have is to integrate choice daily. Again, perhaps because of my role where I will see students up to 2 times a week, I tend to have every minute highly structured, and choice often takes a back seat. And so I started considering, how can I integrate more choice? Even if I'm doing reading remediation, there may be choices within that child's reading level that they can choose. Maybe it's a fiction versus a nonfiction, or a certain story topic versus another. And the third teaching goal I have is the meaningful use of technology. So, for example, I work with students sometimes on oral reading fluency rate, and we often track what their reading rates are, how they're improving. And so I thought, what an easy change to have them track those number of seconds or minute and seconds in an Excel sheet, and then teach them how to use that to create a chart. So they're actually learning how to use technology, but in a more meaningful and analytical context. Another option is, because I do use a lot of visuals, sometimes Google Images to kind of reinforce what we're learning, I can also look for more short little YouTube clips that might break up our session a little bit, kind of helps with the shorter segments of teaching, and also give them a real picture of what it is we're learning. And also, I want to make more use of technology for students who have fine motor difficulties. We have, Kayla had shared with me some time back, an app for using voice to text using Google Docs and so forth. So sometimes students have a lot to say, but because of the hindrance of their fine motor skills, they'll wind up putting a lot less. But through the use of voice to text, they can get their full ideas out. So those would be my goals from this learning experience. Millennial learners of the 21st century really do require diverse instructional practices that were far different from what we experienced as educators. And it's our responsibility to learn these to help prepare them for jobs that are going to be in a competitive global marketplace. Thanks so much for joining to share about this important issue in education today.